For millennia, people from different countries, cultures, and backgrounds have found direction and encouragement in the inspired pages of the Bible. In His day, Jesus directed listeners to search the prophecies of Scripture to find Him, the only way of salvation. 2,000 years later, as we stand on the brink of eternity, we no less need the purpose and hope God's Word provides. Sacramento Central Church brings you Receiving the Word, timely Bible messages presented by Pastors Chris Buttery and Mike Thompson. Amazing revelations await you in God's holy word, the Bible.
Your church, for 110 years plus now, has been sending out Liberty magazine, and I don't know when the shift took place, but for most of my lifetime, it's been directed at what we say are the thought leaders in the community, starting with the president, the congressmen, the senators, state legislators, judges, lawyers, and so on, mayors. Anybody in your community that we would think to be setting public policy and public mores. And we still do that. That's the appeal that you'll hear again, as you do every year. You'll hear it in January. And I thank you in advance for supporting this incredible outreach of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, because Liberty magazine, in distributing nearly 200,000 copies every issue, has placed religious liberty at the top where it should be, and there's no other magazine that I know of that competes with it directly. Certainly none with the distribution, none with the penetration to these thought leaders. But I must tell you, ever since I took over with Liberty magazine nearly 18 years ago, I've thought, what a shame that we have decided we are not thought leaders, that we'll send it to other people, the thinkers. We are all thought leaders. We are all people that set directions, and we should be setting a spiritual direction for our community. And there are many aspects to this, but on religious liberty, how can you do that unless you are reading Liberty magazine? So I want to encourage you. You know, you can go online. You don't have to buy it directly. Go online, libertymagazine.org, and read some of these developments. But then send your money, those dollars that might have otherwise paid for your subscription, send them so that we can direct that subscription to somebody who otherwise wouldn't go online, wouldn't know about it unless it was sitting on their desk, shrieking at them, yelling at them, appealing to them to pay attention to this, as was often said, the first liberty. Here in the United States, we make a lot of the Constitution, of the Bill of Rights, but it's many times been said and proven in practice that religious liberty is the first liberty. If there is no religious liberty, you can guarantee that all of the civil liberties are at risk or non-existent. So please, when Liberty magazine is brought up next year, respond and be thankful that the Lord presented this message of the importance of religious liberty, which is none other than the gospel. I want to share something with you from a book that I picked up, I think in Australia originally, but it was written in 1917 by a Christian writer. The title of it is The Christ We Forget. And in his introduction, the author was Whitwell Wilson. I don't know about you, but I can pretty much tell the time and the location of an author by their name. And this is a very English name of this time period. He wrote it in 1917, just after the outbreak of World War I, when the world was moving beneath people's feet. And it's not settled since. If you know your history, it was World War I that broke the modern era apart. And he said this, before the war, and I could interject, before 9/11, before the war, it seemed almost unnecessary to find time for the Bible. Many of us were making money. Others were busily earning it. Little irony there. Our children were getting on nicely at school. Certainly there were grave evils like drink and bitter social inequalities and rancorous political quarrels and reckless extravagances, which gave us uneasy twinges of conscience. But we drifted, he said. When tens and hundreds of thousands from public worship, we ceased to pray. We quietly laid aside the Bible. Then suddenly, we were brought face to face with facts that we had forgotten. One of those facts was death. Another was pain. Another was hatred. All of that can be explained in the events of the last few hours with the police shootings, I think. we learn that life is not a game, but a grim, heroic combat between good and evil. For this crisis, he said, many were unprepared. Men and women fled for refuge, in some cases to spiritualism, crystal gazing and fortune-telling. Pleasure and romance played their part as comforters. Lives that had been frivolous were consecrated to war work, and there was the growing splendor of national unity, not yet evident to us this side of the election, and personal sacrifice. Hopes of a better dawn have encouraged us. We are sure that faith will return. And then he asked the question, yes, but faith in what? Faith in whom? And then he says, this is my conclusion, we must all long for the time when once more this same Jesus who died shall be known again among men, not as a crucifix merely, or as a shadow, but in all of his fullness of love, of power, of wisdom, of suffering, and of victory. I've thought about this a lot lately. You know, we are Christians. We've taken the name of Christ. You know, we're Seventh-day Adventist Christians, and we sometimes, as we were told to, mention the name of our church first because it is a sermon in itself about what we do as an organization. But we are Christians. And that's more than just people that have chosen to put the name on our T-shirt. We should be exemplifying the founder. And the founder should be very important and central to what we're doing. I chose the text this morning for the reading, and I'm sure you listened when it was read, but I just want to go to it again. You know, Jesus Christ, or Jesus of Nazareth, this new preacher as he circulated around in the ancient land of Palestine, debating with Pharisees and Sadducees and anyone else who would take the time of day to listen to him. You know, he was a phenomenon. And they didn't know what to make of him at that point. The point when this text was worked out. But listen to what happened. He was debating with the Pharisees. And I don't know about you, but over the years, I believe the Pharisees have been given a bad break. They were not the worst of the factions. They were the best part. They were Jesus' faction. The Sadducees didn't even believe in the resurrection of the dead. They didn't believe in miracles. They were the deists of his day. And the scribes, they were the academics. Those who, are too buried in their books and just transcribing letters for other people to really deal with great spiritual truths. But the Pharisees, they knew the law. They understood, but they couldn't internalize these great truths. And Jesus tried to get it through to them. And in one of their great debates, he says in verse 41 of Matthew chapter 22, it says, "Now while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them a question, saying, 'What do you think of the Christ? Whose son is he?'" Then he played tricks with them. You can go to Israel today and they're still very full of the fact that they are descended from David. Jerusalem itself is the city of David. That's sort of their claim to authenticity, to historical reality. But Jesus pointed out that the Christ is greater, and he says, well, he read the text from the Old Testament. It says, they said to him, the son of David. And he said to them, "How is it then that David, inspired by the Spirit, calls him Lord, saying, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I put thy enemies under thy feet'?" And they answered him nothing more, or asked him nothing more from that point. It's not my point to try to explain that relationship, but the real issue is, and I've heard sermons on this in the old days, what think you of the Christ? It's not how does he affect you emotionally, but do you understand who he is? Does he have a place in your life? It's pretty easy to read Uncle Arthur's Bible stories as I grew up, and to realize as an adult that most of your imagery of Bible truth is sort of visualizations of Harry Anderson paintings. It's pretty easy to realize that, and it's not bad, but it might be that it doesn't go beyond this sort of a set piece, this picture roll style theology. We need to see Christ as a living reality. And I believe for religious liberty, Christ needs to be central to this. If we're just talking about legal cases, if we're just talking about history, if we're just talking about church history, we're missing the point. All of those are elements of religious liberty. I have to tell you, it's a very complicated and exciting story, not just for the United States. You know, we should never imagine that religious liberty is only the construct of these colonies that became the United States of America. There are other free countries. You know, thanks to the Lord, this Constitution is one of the most definitive in setting religious liberty, or at least the separation of church and state, as a prime cause. You know, we talk a lot about it, and I studied history here too. Religious liberty is not extolled in the Constitution per se. It just says Congress shall make no law establishing religion, nor prevent the free exercise thereof. So out of the business. And then the only other thing in the Constitution, it says no religious test for public office. We're really checking that one out this election. But, you know, this is not a Christian state. It's not a religious state, but it's been an enabling power for the great and easy practice of religion for a long time, which has led many people to conflate a civil construct with religion. But religion is not just, as the Pharisees thought, do's and don'ts. Religion, as we know it as Christians, is all about Christ. So it seems to me we need to be absolutely grounded in a knowledge of Jesus and what it is to be a follower of His. A few months ago, I was privileged to take my family with me for the second time for me, but first time for them, to Israel on the 3ABN Israel tour. And on one level, the first time I went, I was quite unimpressed, at least in anticipation about this, because I've been to Rome a number of times and other places that the faithful like to frequent and look at the relics and so on. You've got to be aware of that. Most remembrances of early Christianity are no more recent than the Crusades, and even at that period, they were into myth-making. It's worth remembering that for 400 years, nobody even knew where the temple in Jerusalem had been. I mean, it's pretty functional now, where they've dug away under the base there, and there's the Wailing or the Western Wall, and on top of it, of course, are the recent structures erected by the Muslims, one of them converted from Crusader times. But to go to the Middle East, I found, is, if you have an open mind, or to go to Israel in particular, is to see the reality of Jesus, the fact that He did exist, to stand there in Capernaum, in the little church there on the side of the Sea of Galilee. I know in German, sea means a lake, and that's pretty much all the Sea of Galilee is. It's a little lake, the reservoir for one of the driest places on the earth. But there at the synagogue in Capernaum, there's the original floor that clearly dates back to the Roman times and the days of Jesus. Very humbling to realize that Jesus had clearly worshipped there, stood there, looked out on that same lake, very little changed. And then it was my privilege too to baptize my son in the Jordan and to remember that Jesus Himself was baptized. John the Baptist thought, you know, you should rather baptize me. But he gave us a model. These are powerful reminders to me of the reality of Jesus. But another thing it was a reminder to me of, and this is something that you might not expect, but I'd link it to what I started with. We live in troublesome times. And don't imagine for a minute that Jesus came in a quiet pastoral backwater time. He came in the middle of an incipient rebellion. He came on the cusp of the destruction of a people. When Jesus spoke about going the second mile and things like that, you know, the American Revolution was fought, among other things, over the imposition of troops that were garrisoned in private homes and the affront that it was to have what they more and more saw as foreign troops in their midst. That's what Jesus and His peers lived under. They were an occupied country, just like Baghdad was for so long. And we've seen those horrible pictures of doors being beaten in and people grabbed and hooded, and goodness knows what happened to them. That was happening in Jesus' time. And it wasn't just an abstraction that some of his followers were zealots. It wasn't just an abstraction that Judas thought that he could spur him along to rebellion and declare his kingdom. It wasn't just an abstraction that the leaders of the temple were troubled, that he stirred the people up. They saw rebellion bubbling on the surface, not beneath the surface. And when Jesus was crucified, it was the time for the Romans to put this man down or the people would rise up. The Christian message indeed was seen as revolutionary, and it flourished amid revolution. And so we shouldn't think that just because we're living in a bad time, that it's going to be bad for Christianity. Christianity can defeat and rise above all of this. When, not if, when martial law, national or local, comes in this country, you'd better decide ahead of time, will you come to church? People, dismiss it as just nonsense, but it is coming. We know it's coming. Inexorably, the decline of our civilization and of our law and order and of all of our mechanisms for stability, economic and otherwise. It's not the end of the world per se. Jesus said there's been wars and rumors of wars from the beginning. But you and I need to decide when the crunch comes, and just pulled out of a hat, martial law. Are you going to assemble together? Or will you, as is required, stay at home in no more than 2 or 3? These are the issues that Jesus faced in his time. Remember, whenever a crowd gathered, Peter and John, immediately after the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ, immediately they spoke and a crowd gathered. They were seen as dangerous to the public order. But religious liberty, the right to proclaim Christ's methods, Christ's personality, Christ's reality, trumps all of that, in my view. But there's a dialogue early on where Pilgrim is leaving the city of destruction, leaving his wife and family behind at that point. They follow him later, but spiritually he's left them. He's on his way. And he takes with him a character called Pliable. As you can guess, he's not going to last too long. But Pliable says, "Come, neighbor Christian," he says, "since there are none but us two here, tell me how these things are and how to be enjoyed whither we're going." Christian says, "I can better conceive of them with my mind than speak of them with my tongue. But since you are desirous to know, I will read of them in my book." "And do you think that the words of your book are true?" "Ah, verily, for it was made by him that cannot lie." "Well said. What things are they?" "There is an endless kingdom to be inhabited, and everlasting life to be given to us, that we may inhabit that kingdom forever." "Well said. And what else?" "There are crowns of glory to be given to us, and garments that will make us shine like the sun in the firmament of heaven." "This is very pleasant. And what else?" "There shall be no more crying nor sorrow, for he that is owner of the place will wipe all tears from our eyes." "And what company shall we have there?" There we shall be with seraphims and cherubims, creatures that will dazzle your eyes to look upon them. There also you shall meet with thousands and 10,000s. None of them are hurtful, but loving and holy, everyone walking in the sight of God and standing in his presence with acceptance forever. In a word, there we shall see the elders with their golden crowns. There we shall see the holy virgins with their golden harps. There we shall see men that by the world were cut in pieces, burned in flames, eaten of beasts, drowned in the seas, for the love that they bear the Lord of that place, all well and clothed with immortality as with a garment. The hearing of this is enough to ravish one's heart, said Pliable. But are these things to be enjoyed? How shall we get to be sharers thereof? The Lord, the governor of the country, hath recorded that in this book, the substance of which is, if we're truly willing to have it, he will bestow it on us freely. Well then, my good companion, says Pliable, glad am I to hear of these things. Come on, Let's get moving. Mend our pace, he said. You know, it needs to be real. I can remember once we had a book publishing committee at the Review and Herald. May it rest in peace. But they'd gotten together to talk about some of the upcoming books. And one of the proposals was a child's book about heaven. And I can remember one of the leaders saying, well, we really don't know very much about heaven. And I said, of course we do. There are many, many descriptions in the Bible. Obviously, the expressions are limited because it's a reality beyond ours, just like the cargo cult people in New Guinea in World War II when the planes came down. You know, this was a bird from the sky, so they made models of birds. But the descriptions are there. It's certain. This is a real place. It's not a fantastical shimmer or a gleam in someone's imagination. And it's real and palpable and enjoyable, all because of the guarantee of the Lord of that place, Jesus Christ. Ellen White says many things about this, but I think maybe the most succinct is in Steps to Christ, page 103. She says, Christ and Him crucified should be the theme of contemplation, of conversation, and of our most joyful emotion. And you know the one about, be well for us to spend a thoughtful hour. A few years ago, I had the privilege, and I don't understand how I got that privilege, to be a guest of a fellow Adventist lawyer who's a political creature of some degree, but I was his guest as in the board of a right-wing policy group that met in Colorado Springs. And I better not say who were there, but there were billionaires and people from previous administrations, some cabinet members and so on. And it was a heavy-hitting situation. There were about 15 to 20 board members. But the first evening, we had a dinner at Focus on the Family, which was nearby. And after the meal together, Dr. Dobson passed around a document, and we all had to sign it. It was a non-disclosure form at that time, because we were then ushered into a viewing area and shown The Passion of the Christ, an advanced filming about a year before it came out. Here, these were the wealthiest people in the country, the most politically powerful, in a little room where the whole wall was the screen. They saw the film that was critiqued by many commentators, and most of them said that part of its power lay in the fact that it looked like a documentary. The language was Aramaic. It looked like it was happening in front of your eyes. And I remember, as the story unfolded of Christ's last hours, I remember, and I was sitting on the front seat, hearing the noises in the back from these people. Not sniffles, moans, groans, cries of agony. And I realized, if I'd never realized it before, the power of what happened in the life of Christ. It's not an abstraction to see your God literally presented in front of you and being beaten and bruised for our iniquities, as the Bible said. It was powerful. And you know, it's flowed by now, and we've got CG that puts that sort of thing to rest in many people's minds. But I believe the reality of that sort of presentation is unique, and it explains again what you and I should have in our hearts and present to others. Jesus was real. He came, He lived, He died, He will come again. And religious liberty is all about proclaiming Christ. If you can proclaim Him, you have religious liberty. If someone stops you, they've prevented you exercising your religious liberty. Of course, it can't be taken from you. And I want to encourage Seventh Adventists, as you see that campaign next year, to set at liberty, see it as the reality of Christ. It's His message, and we're to proclaim His message because we are His. You know, we don't belong to the General Conference. We don't belong to the United States. We don't belong to our neighborhood. We belong to Christ, bought with a price. And we really need to get on fire. And one thing I remember about my father, and I can't emulate it, but I admired it. You know, he couldn't restrain himself. He had to talk about his faith to anybody he met. And you know, there was some talk, I think in Sabbath school, about evangelization or our evangelistic program. It's not all bad by any means, but it's too rote, it's too formulaic. It has to be like Acts of the Apostles, where it bubbles over from our experience, our excitement at knowing Christ. There's no word against that. I became very enamored in recent years with Christopher Hitchens. I'd read his material, secular material, for many years, and then he got into his phase where he was arguing against religion. I became enamored of listening to his debates. I couldn't fully identify with it because he was a non-believer. He was an articulate, educated man that just argued in a steamroller fashion against any rational possibility of a God or of the biblical truth and so on. You and I can't accept that. But yet, it's humbling to see some of these debates where religious people stood up and debated with him and lost badly. But I noticed something on his debates. Most times, he humiliated his opponents. There were 2 occasions where he didn't. I better not say who they were, but on both occasions, they won, if there was a winning on this, because they spoke about what Christ had done in their lives and what he meant to them. There is no answer to that. And there is power in that. You know, the television is just full of all sorts of programs where someone's lost weight or made $1 million, and you want to do it too. They're the model that you can follow. And if you can say, Christ changed my life, he set me free. You know, I'm not encumbered by all these, I better be careful because I don't like just arguing against legalism, because legalism is a state of mind, not what you do, it's why you do it. But you know, he can free us from that. He can free us from the Pharisaical arguments that they brought up against Jesus. With Jesus in the life and compelling and impelling you forward, all of those arguments just drift away, and I believe the worldling, the disbeliever, has no argument. And they're brought, as those people sitting there in the dark with that film, they're brought face to face with a reality that they either humble and accept or they reject it, and nothing more can be done for them. It's our privilege in these latter days, this time probably just before the return of Christ, but certainly just before the shifting of as Tennyson said, the old order changeth. Just look at you young people. You know society is moving beneath our feet. You don't know who you'll meet in the bathroom. You don't know what you will see in the political world. Everything is shifting. You don't know when you go to buy food whether they'll require some chip or just a thumbprint or an iris scan. You don't know. Money may disappear because all things are shifting and changing, but Christ remains.
We're so glad you decided to tune in to today's Receiving the Word program. If you have a special prayer request, we would be happy to pray about it for you. To discover more about the Bible through our free online Bible studies, or to listen to more life-changing Bible messages, go to saccentral.org and click on the Media Resources tab. If you've been blessed or encouraged by our ministry and God impresses you to support us, then visit our website or write to us at 6045 Camellia Avenue, Sacramento, California, 95819. Always gladly receive God's Word.